Welcome to Router-Made Drawers. In this tape we're going to take a look at half-blind dovetails and how they're made. This is a topic that has a lot of interest to me. I've made a lot of these joints over the years, and I've used some of the simpler jigs such as the type you see back here. We'll give you more information on those as we get in deeper. But what's important here is there are so many of these out here in the market, and I've read so many manuals on them and found so much confusion that that's what this video is about. Let's take the confusion out and let's make it a visual presentation of how the joints are made. Let me direct your attention to the bench now and tell you a little bit about the types of joinery we're working with. We call these half-blind dovetails because half of them are blind. That is to say, if you look at this side, you see the joint, and that is exactly what you'd see in that drawer side. However, if we were to look at it from the front, and just as we would see this drawer back here, you don't see the dovetails until it's open. Once it's open, you see them on the side, and that's part of what it's about, beauty and strength. We'll talk about the beauty and strength aspect in a minute. But for now, you understand why we call them half-blind. As you look at these, you'll see a number of different configurations. These are called half-inch. These are called quarter-inch. And I think that's obvious. Again, these quarter, aren't they pretty? We've got a walnut front and then the poplar sides, which gives us kind of a real nice contrast and look. Beauty, again, is a big part of it. These are slightly larger. They're cut with a half-inch dovetail bit, but with a different type of jig. The neat thing about these is, again, the color contrast and the rhythm. We have a nice balance from top to bottom. You can even use these with plywood. This is a plywood drawer front, and again, you wouldn't even see the plies of the plywood in a typical drawer. The only time you would see it was when you opened it, and you'd still see that beautiful dovetail look. So don't overlook plywood as a possible material for drawer fronts in this case. There is another style we call a 3/8 lip, and in this case we've lipped all the way around it so that the drawer has a shadow. You've probably made 3/8 lip doors, and if you've seen my other videotapes, you've seen me make lip doors and drawers before. Another approach to making a lip is to make just a single box like this, and again all of the parts are the same size, and to make a lip we make an overlay of 3/8 thickness that goes on with that 3/8 clearance all the way around. So now this drawer would fit in the opening, and all you would see would be the oak on the front. Well, those are some of the ways we approach making the drawers up with these dovetail joints. As I mentioned, there are jigs for them. Now, why dovetails? That's a question that's often asked. 1, beauty. 2, strength. 3, more gluing surface. As we break these open, you'll notice that there's an angular part to them, which gives us more face grain gluing and a lot more gluing area. As we put those together with the glue and we try to separate them, there's a wedging action that makes them even stronger. There's also a perceived quality. That is, many people will call out that the drawers in their cabinetry must be dovetailed because they believe it is an indication of quality. One final thing to help you orient yourself with terms is this. As you look inside, you'll notice that we make an opening in the front. That is typically referred to as the socket. The wood on either side of that is referred to as the tails. And then the material that's inserted into the sockets is referred to as the pins. Now this is pretty much standard terminology. With some manufacturers, their manuals use different terms. Study their manual carefully so you're aware of what's going on. One final thing to note. In most cases, the drawer fronts are thicker than the sides. Typically, with most cabinet work, the drawer fronts are 3/4 and the sides are 1/2 inch. You saw this drawer over here where all the parts were 1/2 inch. That's fine. We added an overlay to make it look like it was a thicker drawer. So you can work with 1/2 inch and in some cases 1/4 inch stock depending on the type of jig you're working with. As you look at the manual for any jig you have, it will give you specifications to the thickest and thinnest stock you can work with. Study that and make sure you stay within the range. But typically the ranges are what I've already talked about. All right, I'm going to meet you back here in a minute. I'm going to set out some of these dovetail jigs and talk about some of the unique things about them. So I'll see you back here in just a second. I set up a few of the dovetailing jigs from my collection, and I thought I'd share with you some of their qualities so you have a better appreciation of what works and what doesn't, how they work, and what you might find most beneficial to you as you shop for these jigs. Over here on my right are some of the older typical standards. Here's another one that's a very common one. And finally, one of the newest on the market. The three here have something in common, and that is control of the bit. In any of the dovetailing jigs, we usually use a follower guide. And this follower guide is a ring like so that goes into the router. Through that ring is the router bit. So now what happens is this ring will control the path of the router bit as it follows the comb or the mechanism here. Now, what you saw there was a 1/2 inch one. This one is a little smaller, and it's a 1/4, obviously too big for this bit. A smaller bit is used here. When these are inserted into the router, this knurled ring, which is threaded, holds it in place and locks it in securely so that it will follow the bit like that, or follow the template so it will guide the bit is what I should say. This one has the same setup as this in that it too uses the same size follower guide. Now, they are all common that way. Let's take a look at this one here. This one has the same kind of comb, except the spaces are a little bigger here. The reason they are is that rather than using a follower guide, this uses a ball bearing on the bottom of the, or above the bit, so that as this goes across the template, that ball bearing rolls on the template to control the path of the bit. Now, this technique has one advantage, and that is that there's no problem with concentricity. In other words, that ball bearing is very concentric with the bit because it comes through the center hole. If we use these follower guides, if the base is slightly askew on our router, it could double the error and there could be a problem. What would that mean for you? Well, as you fed the router in one direction, it would make a cut. If you turned it the other way, it would cut again because of the offset. That second cut would suggest then that the fit will not be very good unless that's been accounted for. If you turn your router around and you hear that cutting, that's an indication that you have a concentricity problem. This jig is a Woodhaven, and it's a brand new one on the market. They've also made up templates for other routers that would allow you to use, or other jigs that would allow you to use their template on the jig you already own. So these are available through the Woodhaven company. Now, let's take a look at some other features of these. I'll set these follower guides aside now, and we'll take a look at the template and clamping mechanism. On many of these jigs, the template or comb type device is clamped in place and is a separate piece. It comes off like so. Of the four that are up here, this one, and this one have a separate template. Set that back here. This particular one has the template supported to the clamping mechanism on the back. If you look at this rod or this bar coming out, it's screwed on here. This is all a single unit and is clamped at one time. Is that a problem? No, it isn't really a problem, but when we go to change the stops and so forth, it's easier to have access when the template board comes off like so. Let's take a look at what we might want to have access to. One of the things we might want to have access to are these holes here, and this stop is designed to go in various holes for the type of joint that you're cutting. For example, over here I'm in A, that would be for a 3/8 inch rabbet. Over here I'm in C, that would be for a straight half-blind dovetail, and B would be for a 1/4 inch dovetail. So all of these have a different positioning, and they are the stops that allow you to position your stock correctly when you work with a jig. There are also two stops down here behind the clamping mechanism. You can look down through here and see the threaded hole. The other one is right behind here, so we'd have to take the clamping bar off to have access to that. This jig is a little more modern, and it has one feature. It knows that you may not keep the manual as long as you keep the jig. So what they've done is they've taped down a guide to the front of this that tells you what you need to know for the type of joint, where the stop needs to be. And these stops are a little different. You loosen that screw and you just turn them so that whatever is oriented over here is the appropriate stop, A, B, or C. Again, it has a series of stops down below. You can see the red here, and it's a matter of indexing that stop again. These are a little harder to get at, but there is a hole right through the top of the template board that I can get to loosen the screw and turn this stop. So this stop is a little bit different. This one here has a stop that is a piece of aluminum that's L-shaped. The offset for one side, the 7/8, is inside now. The offset for the 1/2 is out here. So in other words, if I want to change these, I'd loosen these two screws, move this one over here and this one over here so that this side would be closer to the center. That's another thing that we ought to address real quickly now, and that is the template boards. This one uses 1/2 or 7/8 inch spacing, 1/2 and 7/8. This one uses 1/2, but it also has a 1/4 inch template that's available, and it also has a 3/8 inch offset template that's available. And the difference between these two is that this one goes 3/8 inch deeper. You don't really need this template because you could move the piece 3/8 of an inch further forward to get the same effect. So these are some things that you may or may not want to use depending on what you want to use. This pin board has a 1/4 inch and a 1/2 inch, so there are two in this one, and this one here has strictly the 1/2 inch template, and you again would have to buy others to use it like so. Now, there is one thing that's different here, and that is I mentioned we had a 3/8 that went 3/8 deeper. If you'll look at the mechanism here, there is a washer and a spacer, and I'll hold those up so you can see them. There's the washer, there's the spacer. I can either put the template here, here, or here. Now, the reason I might put it here is that would give me my 3/8 offset. I would put it here for a slightly recessed flush, and I would put it here for a dead perfect flush joint. So what that means is once I've set the stop appropriately for the actual flush joint, I can also move the template back further and get a perfect 3/8 from the same setup. That also applies to this one. It has the same rods. With these two, we'll have to use a spacer block to kick the piece forward or get a separate template for this one to bring the piece back 3/8. That's a lot of information regarding templates. I think it'll have more value as you see it applied and we actually cut some dovetails. But this will give you some basic information to begin with. I want to now show you some dovetails and some applications so you can see those, and once we've done that, we'll set up the routers and get some chips on the floor. So we're heading forward. Bear with me and pay attention because these things will come back to be reinforced later. See you in just a minute. I've set up a number of the drawers we've made during the course of preparing for this video to do a little show and tell to help you understand how the parts fit together and to also help you plan. As you watch this video, you can be thinking about how you want to make your drawers. So let's take a look at a few things to begin with. First of all, we've got one of the drawers we made up. All the parts are marked and they're assembled. But as we look inside, we see there's no groove for the drawer bottom. Now, the reason there isn't is I have two choices, don't I? Top or bottom. What might determine that might be how the dovetails line up. For example, I would probably want that groove to be in the middle of one of these dovetails, so when I cut the groove on inside faces, it wouldn't show up. That is, I wouldn't see a notch here. Now, in some cases, you might cut the drawer groove first, and if you don't position it correctly, can you see what the end would look like? I think you'd agree that we cut right through the tail. But we're kind of stuck. If we worked off the other side, we might have been able to hold it low. So part of the spacing of the dovetails will impact on whether you plan to cut the grooves beforehand or not. Also, if you had a slight error in your jig and there's a slight offset, you could plane that out and then cut the grooves accordingly, and you'd still have a good fit. So I think it's a better practice to put the groove in after the fact. that doesn't mean it can't be done. As you look at these two, they have the typical 3/4 inch front on them with the 1/2 inch sides. This one also has the 3/4 inch front, except this 3/4 inch front is rabbeted. And this type of drawer would give you the 3/8 lip that we talked about earlier, and you'll see how this dovetail is cut, what we have to do to offset to make this dovetail with the jig. So this again is a 3/4 inch front, but it has a 3/8 rabbet right down the center line of its thickness. How we hold the drawer together may also be part of it, and how we put it together. These all had the 3/4. This one has a 1/2, as does this one. What we've done here is added a 3/4 inch false front, and on this one we've added a 3/8 inch false front to give us that overlay. This one was cut as a raised panel, and it allows us to have a real fancy looking front, and this is for a cabinet I'm about to finish. As you look at the side of this drawer, you'll see that I came through again with my drawer bottom. Also, I've only dovetailed the front. The back is not dovetailed, or is it? As you note here, it's actually a dovetail dado. This can be done with a router table, and it can also be done with a table saw. As you look at some of my other videos, you'll see some techniques employed to make this. Why might you put dovetails only at the front? Well, that's where the pulling strength needs to be. The joint you put at the back could be a dovetail, or it might be something else. For example, it could also be a dado, such as you see here. There is one other thing I'd like to point out on this drawer, is that rather than cut a groove, we cut a rabbet on the bottom to accommodate the drawer bottom, and thusly we eliminated changing the rhythm or showing any grooves or cutouts along that dovetailed front. So there are a number of ways of handling these issues, but if you plan ahead, you won't have to be covering up errors. You'll be coping with success. You'll say, well, that's the next step. I know about that and I'm prepared for it. And that's why I show you these things, to get you oriented as you watch the video, to ask yourself those questions and think intelligently as you go, how do I want to do it for the project I'm building? That's where the payoff is. So I'm going to get some routers and we're going to set up and we're going to cut some dovetails here in just a minute. Be right back. We're finally ready to set up the router. There are a few things that we have to think about in the process. First of all, I'm going to take out the appropriate follower guide, and I can always check that to prove my arithmetic before I go, and a ring to hold it in. Once I've got those, I'll close this, get it out of the way. This goes in the bottom like so, and there is like a little rabbet around here, a little notch so to speak. So when this goes in, it's a nice tight fit. That reduces any error of concentricity. Then we drop this knurled ring in through the top. This is a little bit of a test depending on the size of your hands. Cinch that up, and now what we've got is a perfect setup for the bit to go through. Now, some of you might say, why didn't you put the bit in first? Well, that's a good question to ask, but as you notice, the bit won't go through, so this is the best way, unless you want to do it twice, to put this on, and then you can proceed to chuck the bit. So we'll get this started on here. We'll bring it down so we have approximately a 1/2 inch between the bottom of this and the bottom of the collet. Then we can insert, and we want at least this much in the bit, of the bit in the collet, so we'll bring it up till we're about there. That looks pretty good, and we know we've got quite a bit in the collet, and that's the best way to work. We'll tighten it up. How tight's tight enough? Well, I don't want it walking out of there. So I'll just get my 2 wrenches on the flats. Give it a little bit of a squeeze. That should be good. Now, it's better that you have a little extra sticking out. Otherwise, if you have to make adjustments, if you were to tighten this down, it's conceivably possible that you could tighten the collet down on that follower guide. That wouldn't be a good situation. So with this much bit sticking out, the opposite will be true. As I make adjustments, I'll be around this range here, and that won't be a problem. For most of the jigs that you'll be working with, the typical half-blind dovetailing jigs, the instructions will tell you to bring the bit down 17/32. Well, that's the distance from that flat over like so, but the flat is actually a little higher than where the follower guide is. So one of the easiest ways to make that check is to take a board like this and cut a slight dovetail, and that's all you'll cut, just like so. And that will show you the depth. This one is already set at 17/32, and I could check this one of two ways. That is, if I had cut it, I can now bring my scale over and measure from there, and I get a nice accurate measurement and no fooling around. You've got a scrap that you can work with. All you got to do is clamp it in a vise and nick it. You won't go very deep because the follower guide won't allow you to. I'll use this as a technique to set the approximate depth to begin with. Bearing in mind that all jigs work just a little bit differently. All right, so with most of the jigs, that will be the setup. If you're using the Woodhaven, you'll need a 13/16 setup, and we've done exactly the same thing here. I've set up this router so that the ball bearing rolled on the edge of the board, but I was able to cut that line at the correct bit depth, which is 13/16. Once that's set, I'm ready to go. Now, as you work with these jigs, when you get them, you will find that there's some other things you need to work with, or at least be concerned with. First of all, where is the template board? In most cases, the distance from the template board, the bottom of those grooves, to the front face of that jig will be somewhere between 1/2 and 5/8 inch. In most cases, the manufacturer's been very good about presetting them. That is to say, they've been preset to a very close positioning. If you happen to get one that's out of whack, that would be different. Another thing that might be different is if you had a template for a 3/8 inch rabbet. This is a typical 1/2 inch, and if you had one that was for a 3/8 rabbet, it would be deeper. These are approximately 1 inch fingers on these jigs, and if they were 1 3/8 to 1.5 inches, then that measurement of a 1/2 inch would have to be closer to 7/8 to 1 inch. So you can check that. Another good check is the depth uniform from end to end? Sometimes people will get those askew. Now, if you have to make an adjustment of the depth of the template board, and you will if the joint doesn't fit well, there is a bolt on the inside of this one that you turn either in or out to allow that to go in or out. On this one, and this is a Porter cable, you loosen this screw here and here, they're identical, and you move this in and out. And there's plenty of room for movement there. Usually what I do is I score a line back here with an awl once I get the setting exactly where I want it. And then that line will be my reference point from then on. So there are a number of ways that you can work, and these are some things you can do to figure out where you are. One other thing you might want to do is just lightly make a pencil mark to begin with. That way, as you start to veer one way or the other, you can see where you've been from the original pencil line and get a better handle on how your setup's going. Now, on the Woodhaven, there's just a little bit difference. It comes just about out of the box ready to go. When I set this up, it was a perfect fit. There's a washer on here. You can put the washer back or forward. If you put the washer forward and you get a good fit and you want it a little deeper, you can move the washer to the other side. That'll give you about a 30-second offset. It too has bolts here, or nuts I should say, that you can tighten or loosen to move the pin board in or out. Like I said, it was very close to a perfect setting when I got it, but it does have the provisions for adjustment. It's good practice to make a test setup and then go from there. Like I say, they're pretty good about leaving these come out of the box in good order, leaving them set for you to make it easy. All right, so now we've got the templates ready, we've got the follower guides in, the bits set. I'm going to clamp up a template or two on the bench and do some test setups and talk about the things that you need to look at. So let me get these clamped, get a router, and I'll be right back. I've been testing the setup out on this Woodhaven jig, and I've got my parts in. I'm real pleased with that joint. Now, I could make it a little deeper by tightening the nuts that allow that template to go in. That is to say, behind the template are two nuts. You saw those earlier. I could tighten them up. Or I could put this behind the washer, and that would drive it in another 1/16. That'd be fine, but I'm pretty happy with what I've got. If this edge were rough and needed more sanding, then I would go ahead and do that. All right, so that setup is good. Now I've got to go ahead and test the setup over here. What I've done is I've marked two pieces. The 3/4 inch piece says FR here, front right. The side piece says SFR, side front right. Now it's 1/2 inch, it should be obvious, but never doubt that it, or never take that for granted. Just sure as you do, there will be a problem. I'm going to pick up the front right side and bring it around so the inside is exposed, and I'm going to loosely clamp it over on the left side of the jig. Then I'll bring the front right so that that front right mark comes over this way, the inside is exposed, and I'll slip this through the jig like so. Now as I look down here, there's a stop. I'm touching the stop, and I'm touching that piece of 1/2 inch at the front. So all I've got to do is clamp down on that, and I'll test it. That's pretty good. Now, the template guide is attached to this, so it's all down snugly on there. The next thing I'll do is touch the pin and bring my side up so it's touching the underside of the template as well. So let's loosen this side a little bit, then this side. And I'll look down through here, and one of my tests, a lot of times I'll just take my little straight edge and see, am I really lined up there, and am I really touching the template? And if I am, I'm satisfied that that's right. So let me clamp it down. I always tighten down on the far side a little bit more. That tends to do a little pushing toward that stop. And then I tend to check those just to make sure they're not going to walk on me. And that's usually a good practice. Now, I'll make the test cut on this, and we'll see how it fits, and then we'll talk about what has to be done. I'll position my router so the bit is clear of the workpiece, and then I'll turn it on. I'll cut a V across the front first, and then I'll go into the pockets. I always check my parts, and it looks like I missed a little spot there, so I'm going to just go back and touch that up. As I look in there, it looks like I may have moved that piece just a hair. And that suggests that maybe I wasn't in tight enough. That does happen sometimes. When you have something like that, it suggests that maybe something moved a little bit in the template. Well, that joint is a good fit. My guess is that I had some movement. Well, if your joint fits that good the first time, buy that lottery ticket. Let me show you a few things that might happen and how you would address those no matter what type of jig it is. These are numbered number 1, and this would follow the course of action that I went through. This is the front, and this is the side. Since the side sticks out too much, the pin template has to come back. How much does it have to come back? 1/2 of the distance between those. In other words, that looks like it's sticking out about 1/8. The template has to come back a 1/16 because remember, when we cut these, we're cutting both pieces at the same time. We'd actually be taking a 1/16 off the front of these pins, and we'd be going a 1/16 deeper into the sockets all in one pass. So it's always half the amount of adjustment. Now let me show you one other that we ought to take a quick look at. This is another one that I've done. This was number 1, this was marked number 2, and this was the second in the sequence. I don't know how well you can see it, but there's just about a 1/16 to a 32nd extending beyond, this being the front, this being the side. So now I've got to go somewhere between the 32nd and the 64th movement inward of the pin template to get the fit. Right now, this is number 2. So let's take a look at number 3 in the sequence. Number 3 fit real nicely from this being the front, this being the side. We're nice and flush, and that was good. But as I tried to bring it apart, it was really tight, which means then that if I were to add glue, it would be very difficult to get this together. So I had to make it just a little looser so that they slip together. When I add the glue, I'll get a tight fit. Now, how does one make it a little looser? Well, if you put these together like so, and you raise the router bit up, in other words, the router bit comes up, you'll take more wood off both sides, inside and out, because they're cut both at the same time. So when you want a looser fit, the bit has to go up. When you want a tighter fit, the bit has to go down, which leaves more wood and more interference. So when you start with that 17/32 or 13/16, depending on the jig you're on, that's only a guideline. After that, you're going to have to fine-tune it after you've got your fit. It may be that even on the first time, they're too tight to go together. Then you're going to have to bring the bit up. If they're too loose, take the bit down. Remember that. That's probably one of the hardest things to remember with this. Most people think it's just the opposite. Okay, so what I've done is walked you through some of the things you need to know to set up the templates. Any one of these follows these techniques right to the letter. So once that's done, we can take any jig and proceed to cut dovetails. And I'm going to be back in a minute with all of the parts and some other setups, and I'll share with you some more information. That information will help you get through making a drawer real successfully. So I'll be right back with all those parts. See you in a minute. I brought my flip chart in to help you out because things are going to get complex here, and this is going to be the easiest way for you to get ahead with this, to make it easy as possible. Now, I've got a couple guidelines written down here. I'm going to explain those, and then I'm going to show you one other thing, and then we're going to cut a drawer. First of all, the front and back are always horizontal in the jig, and that's one of the things you have to remember. In other words, if you put those parts in horizontally, you're on the money. If you put them in vertically, it's going to be wrong, all wrong. Now, as you look at this, this represents the jig, this represents the template. So the front and back will be this way, the sides will be this way. To help you out, imagine this jig just like so. So in other words, horizontal would be the front and back, vertical would be the sides. The top edge of the drawer is always butted against the stop at the outside edges of the jig. The inside portion of the drawer is exposed, or I guess that would also mean the outside is down or against the jig, good face down or outside face down. The good faces are probably inside and already sanded, which is another important thing. If you sand them afterward, you'll affect the fit of the dovetails. Let's take a look at something else. I've got two columns here. The joint, meaning the front right corner, is cut on the left end of the jig, and the front left corner of the drawer is cut on the right end of the jig. Now, if you just think about it in terms of these two, the fronts are always opposite. Now I'll explain why in a minute. The back right corner is cut on the right side of the jig, and the back left corner is cut on the left side of the jig. So the backs then are always cut on the same side as they are indicated. The reason for that is by doing it this way, you always have a full dovetail at the top of the drawer, and any odd or half or quarter dovetail is always at the bottom of the drawer. So it looks nice when it goes in, and that's the rationale behind it. Now, if you forgot any of these, you can always back up your video and make a note of those. But they may be in your manual, and maybe just a little harder to extract the information from the manual, and I'll leave this here as we go along. Now let me direct your attention over here. I put together my parts just as I envisioned my drawer. This is a flush drawer, so I cut the drawer front to fit the opening exactly. And exactly meaning with the appropriate tolerances about 1/8 total side to side and top to bottom. I then have my sides and my back positioned like so. My front and back are the same length, although the back could be maybe a smidgen smaller to give you a little taper so it got smaller as it went in. It depends on the kind of guide you're using as to whether you'd want that or not. Once I did that, I marked the corners. Now let me give you an example. On the front here, it says FL, front left, FR, front right, BL, back left, and BR, back right. The same thing has gone on here on the sides. Here it says SFL. You know what that means, don't you? Side, front, left. On the right, SFR, and so forth. Now, in doing this and teaching people how to use this jig, people said, Roger, doesn't this take a lot of time? I don't want to do this. Let me suggest something. There are 4 corners with 2 parts. That means you could goof up 8 different ways, 4 times 2. This is an investment of time, not a waste of time, and let's walk through it now and show you how this is going to work. All right, so let's pick up the front right. The upper part will go against the stop, so I have to bring it around like this because we're going to the left side of the jig. The inside is exposed. I bring this through the jig like this. It'll butt to the stop. You can hear that stop. We're just going to lay it there for the moment. SFR, I'll bring that up. The inside faces out. I'll tuck that in like so, and I'm just going to lightly clamp this. And the reason I want to do that is that becomes a stop. So I'll push it toward the pin, and I'll push it toward that drawer front like so. I'll clamp this side, and then I'll start to snug down on this side. You may see a slight arc to this, and that's okay. I want to push it toward that pin. Next, I give it a little twist like that, and I want to make sure it's in there snugly. I don't want it moving once that router bit contacts it. Having satisfied that, I'll loosen this up a little bit, and I'll bring this up, this being the side, so it's against the stop, and it's flush across the top. I'll snug down this side, then I'll give this a little extra. Doing the same thing, I don't want any movement. Okay, so this is the front right corner on the left side of the jig. The upper portion is touching the stops, and the exposed part is the inside of the box. What I'll do first is I'll make a cut across here to make a V, and I'll show you that cut first, at least on this corner, and that'll help you understand how we control tear out. What I've done is I made a V cut across there, and I climb cut with the router, and I'm not really too worried about that because I've got good control. Also notice I've formed a beautiful shoulder there. That shoulder then, when I come out of those pockets with the bit, will not allow any tear out because I've got such a crisp edge there. This is the best practice to get this to work. I'll probably climb cut that little corner off first, and then I'll come back over here and work my way down. The reason I want to climb cut that is I don't want to tear that out going in. So let's try that out. Put the muffs on again. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is look down into the pockets, and one thing I observed is this one here gave me a little resistance going in, and that pocket isn't as deep as the others. So I'm going to go back and cut it again. It's real important you look at it right now, and the reason it's important you look at it now is if you took it out of here, you may never get it clamped back in there in the same fashion. This is the problem child right here, and I don't know how well the camera can pick it up, but there's a little extra wood there. I need to go in a little bit deeper. So I can do that. Now also, you may have noticed that I was very careful with the router. I brought it away, shut it off, and then lifted it. One of the quickest ways to goof any one of these jigs up is to lift up out inside one of those pinholes, because the dovetail bit is bigger than the template. If you lift up, it'll route a big hole in it, and you'll have about a $30 experience on your hands. So try to avoid that. Think ahead and try to avoid any problems like that. So let's go back and cut this one more time. That's got it. I was experiencing some resistance there, and I'm not sure if the template's a little small there or what happened exactly. Okay, so that's the front right corner. Now, since I'm set up for 3/4 and the back is half, I'll move this around. There's my front right. If I bring it around, you can probably see that front left. The front left now goes in this side against that stop. The front left then comes up like this and turns, so the inside is facing out, the top edge of the drawer is against the stop. So again, I'll bring this up, loosely clamp it here, and that'll give me a stopping position. And I can look through that hole and see that I'm on the stop, and I can look across the front here, clamp this down like so, put a little extra tension here, test my part, loosen up here, bring my side up, make sure I'm on the stop, touching here, clamping here. Now again, I'm putting a little more here to kind of push it that way, and I'm pretty well satisfied that's going to work. Oops. All right, once I've done that, I can then make a climb cut across the front and then into the pockets. I won't stop to show you that cut this time. I'm just going to proceed and make up this front joint. Okay, that's the other front corner. I've looked in here, things are the same depth. I'm pretty well satisfied that this is going to work out. So let's remove this, and it'll come out and it'll go just like that. Now let's remove the front. There's front right. That's a little tight, but I can live with that. I could always sand the inside of the drawer a little bit if I wanted to. Okay, so those are looking pretty good. If I wanted it a little looser, I would have to bring the bit up a little bit to cut a little more out. But I'm going to be satisfied with that. Take these apart. All right, so now I'm to the back corners. We've got the side, we got the back left and the back right. Now, remember, the back right is just the opposite, so the back right corner comes up like so on the right-hand side of the jig. I'm just going to touch that lightly, push down here, and bring that down approximately where it belongs. The side back right then, I'll put the top edge against the pin, bring that up like so, loosely clamp it here. Okay, I'll bring this up. and it'll be the same thing. So we'll cut this and then we'll proceed to cut the other corner. Next we go to the back left, which means we loosen this up, bring this around. I can see my BL. My BL comes in like that. Take this out like so, and I look at it, there's my side back right, side front right. I know that I'm running out of parts, it's the side back left. This comes up like this, turns like so, and goes into the jig in this fashion. And like I say, I lightly clamp that to position my mating piece. Get it about where it needs to be. And there's the fourth corner. Okay, so as I look through there, everything looks good again. Bring this piece out, front left, side front left, and so forth. Look at my parts, bring them around. They go together like so. At this point, I might want to take a mallet and just tap those together to see how much excess I have. Looks pretty good. Now as you look at these corners, you notice the top lines up pretty good. There's just a little bit of difference, but it's in the sanding zone. That's fine. Also notice at the top of the drawer we start with a full dovetail. We lucked out here, we have a full dovetail here, but imagine if that drawer stopped short there, or up here we'd have like a 1/8 of a dovetail. That would be at the bottom of the drawer or box, and that makes it a lot better because now you don't have to cope with that. When you open the drawer, the first thing you see is the top. You tend to start to lose your line of vision as you go down. This went together well. It followed all of the things that I've given you in the charts. So remember this, and then there's a couple other things. Did I put them here? Wrong way. The other guidelines. So use this as a review, study this a bit. We'll be back to do some 3/8 rabbets, which are just a little bit different than this. A lot of information to absorb. Study that and I'll be back in a minute. I'm on the right-hand side of the jig making the front left corner. It's a rabbeted joint, and I want to show you something interesting here. This is the drawer front, or the drawer side, and I've cut the pins as you see. But let's take a look at what's behind here. Notice also that I've cut in and I've cut the back. The back right now, though, is only a support because where I had the template held me here. to cut back here, I had to move those spacers we talked about earlier forward to position them here, which now means that to cut the front, I actually cut that first, then put the side in and cut it second by moving the template forward. So there's two positions of the template here. Now, remember earlier I said that you could replace that template and put this template on. That would allow you to cut the front, but you'd have to remove it to cut the other part. You can also use a spacer to do that. We'll talk about that with a Woodhaven jig here in a minute. But for now, let's show you what happens when we do the other side. First, we'll loosen up the clamps. Let's bring this around like so. And one thing I didn't show you, but I will now, is I've moved the stop position to move over exactly 3/8 of an inch so that that'll accommodate the offset of the 3/8 rabbet. Now I'm going to be cutting the deepest part here, so I'll position that in like so, and I'll take this side out, and we'll take the right side, and I'll just bring this up and lightly clamp it. And I've clamped it below where the router would be, so I'm not really worried about its positioning too much. I'll bring that over against the stop, hold down on it, check for movement. Then I can drop this down, and I'll just leave it down there. It could come out, but it's not going to matter. I've got my template way back, so I can now cut this, this being the front, then I'll bring it up and cut the side. So let's see how this goes. Okay, I've cut that. I'm going to leave it just where it is. I'm going to loosen up the template piece, push the spacer and the washer back, reposition that. Clamp it down. Now I'll loosen these clamps up. I'll bring my drawer side up. Check that. Now, I'll just cut through that. As soon as I hear it stop cutting, I won't push all the way back. Not that it would matter, because the template would stop me from going all the way into it. Okay. Put the pieces together and see what happens here. Okay, that's a nice fit, and I've got my rabbeted fronts made up. Worked out very well. I guess I could push that in a little more. There it is. Okay, so that's the setup for making a 3/8 rabbet, and allows everything to line up. Again, you have to make some compensations on your width of stock. This lines up perfectly at the datum point. I'm a little over there, which suggests maybe that part's a little wide. It might have a slight taper. I can check that width and rip it if I need to. All right, so now we've seen rabbeting with this jig. The difference between these two is that, again, you have the stop in here, but for the depth, you either have to put this deeper template on or push the piece out with a spacer block. I won't show you on this jig, but I will show you on the Woodhaven. I'm going to get those materials, and I'll be right back with that setup. So I'll see you back in just a second. I've reversed the template and I've got the larger hand cutting look up front, and this is what you'll see in a typical blind dovetail, half-blind dovetail. Now, by changing the position of the stock, we can also make a rabbeted dovetail, and that's what I have here. This would be the representative corner of a drawer where you have a lip or a 3/8 rabbet all the way around the edges. Positioning the stock is a little different here. The rhythm of the template would be the same. Let's take a look. I've got our piece of stock that's been rabbeted. It's got the 3/8 rabbet all the way around. When I position this in here, I've moved this stop, and I'll just show you real quickly that when I put this in position, you'll see that when that's against the stop, that rhythm is about the same in all three spaces. So that's how I selected the position of the stop. And I did the same thing at the other end. So I have essentially the same type of spacing. Once I've done that, the next question that you're probably asking is, how do you position this so that the stock is even with the front? Well, we've made up a stop that has the same 3/8 rabbet that we have on the drawer. And if I slip this in like so and clamp it up, I can push against the stop and against this, and that will not only square me up, but it will locate me flush with that line. So let me snug that up now. And I can leave that there. It doesn't really matter because that's lower than it has to be. Generally, I take it out. I've got the stop. Be my luck, I'll dovetail it if I'm not careful. All right, so I've got this piece positioned. Now the next question you're saying is, well, how do you put the mating part in? Well, obviously you can't right now, so we'll do the front first and then we'll do the two sides. I'll put the template in, clamp it securely, and I'm ready to route. Now all I have to do is reposition the piece. So let's take the template off for a second. Put our stop back in. Loosen these, and remember the piece, this edge is the upper edge. It's going to come around just like this. Go against the stop, against the spacing board. Okay, so that's the front done now. Now the question that you're probably saying is, how do I put the mating pieces in? Well, the mating pieces have to be put in a little bit differently, and what's happening is they have to line up with this edge here. And to do that, what I've done is I've cut a strip of wood that is equal to this width. If I slip this back here, I think it'll be easier to see. In other words, the spacing from that edge to there is correct for positioning the piece. So what I'll do now is I got to locate the top of the side. I'll put the pin board back in, clamp it like so, and now let's remove this piece. So now I'll take my sides and I'll use this as my stop. I'll butt it to the underside of the pin board. Okay. Oops. That does happen sometimes, and that's why I always check them. I don't want that to move around on me. So am I snug there? Okay. So now I can make this cut. Now, could I put a backing piece behind there? Yes, I could. I don't know if it's going to be necessary. If I see a lot of tear out, I will put one back, but I'm going to ease through it and just see how it goes. I could use a piece of plywood back there, though. All right, I've got a nice clean cut across there, just a little bit of fuzz. So now let's go with the mating piece now. So if I want it in like so, this will be the edge up. Okay, we got the piece in snug. Okay, so there's my 3/8 lip joints cut. Now I did that again just as a refresher. I had to space over on the fronts because the 3/8 inch rabbet that I cut moved me over 3/8, the same amount. So whatever this space is here, your stop will be that same size to kick your part over. All right, now from here again we can go with whatever we want. Do we want dovetails on the back? And if we do, remember we're going to go back and cut just the opposite way. In other words, we'll use no spacers next time. We'll just put the sides and the front in position. However, our dovetails will be a little bit different. They'd actually be starting up here. So we may want to reposition the stops for that to get the same nice rhythm on the back. So if you're doing a lot of rabbeted drawers, you would do the fronts all first and then you would change the stop instead of kicking back and forth. Once you've got your setup and it's working like this, boy, don't change a thing. In fact, I think I'm going to go out and buy a lottery ticket. It works so well. I'm going to set up some other techniques now, and I'll be back here in a minute. We've made the transition from 1/2-inch dovetails down to 1/4-inch dovetails. What's different? Well, in this case, the template was turned around. In this case, we've got a smaller template than you'd typically expect in a jig this size. Both of these templates have a smaller comb so that they make a smaller rhythm. Now the setups are the same. This was not deep enough, that is, the side didn't go into the front deep enough, so what did we have to do? We tightened up on the nuts behind the template board to bring that down. Now once we did that, we're just a little deep. That was my second setup, so I backed off, and this is what I came up with, a nice tight fit, and this is the fourth corner being done here. So I can put this together and I'll be satisfied that I've got a real nice joint. We made small drawers like this using the 1/4-inch, and with this setup you can use stock as thin as a 1/4-inch. Little drawers for secretaries that fit nicely like this. This would be for your stamps, stationery, that sort of thing, and it's a nice fit. Also a place where you might use these is half drawers. That is, within a drawer you may take another piece and make a half drawer that fits in there. Slides back and forth and gives you access to the materials under it. So you can make better use of the space in some cases. So that might be another application. The rhythm of these is always real nice. Again, we're starting with a full dovetail as long as you remember the techniques I showed you earlier in the tape. The odd unit would always be at the bottom, down there where it's not as visible. Let me direct your attention to this larger jig now. We've cut 1/4 inch dovetails here, except we've cut them on thicker stock. We've used 1/2 inch stock here and cut 1/4 inch dovetails. That may seem like a little ridiculous as far as what goes together here, but the fit is still nice and they work very well. Now, the difference with this jig is that you have to use stock 5/16 of an inch thick or thicker. It won't go down to 1/4 inch. So should you use this for 1/4 inch dovetails, you'll have to factor that into your plan. The smaller jigs will allow you to go down to 1/4 inch. Well, that seems like the very low end of this jig. I'm going to set it up now for what we call hand-cut dovetails, and I'll be back in a minute to meet you with a new setup on this larger jig. See you then. I've reset the Omni-Jig to what we call a hand-cut mode. And in the hand-cut mode, the modules are a little different. The front is in here just like this horizontal piece is. And if you look at these, they look more like the old style that were hand-cut. The idea here is you've got nice modules of 2 inches, and that's what it takes. Your stock is a module of 2 inches plus 1/8 to about 1/4. And what that allows you to do is have wood on either end to give you a balanced look. Now this isn't perfectly balanced, it's a little off, and I could change that by moving my stops here very easily. But for the sake of demonstration, I'm happy with what I have, and I'm going to go through. Right now, I've set up my stop to locate my front. The stop, these two pieces will be in the same alignment when the cuts are made. But right now, I'm going to cut the front, and I'll use this template that's on. When I cut the side, I have another template that has just about the mate of this. In other words, if you were to look at these, you can see that this is removing what's remaining here. And that's pretty much how all of the jigs work. All right, so I think I'm about ready to make the cut. My piece is in snugly. First thing I have to do is remove the side. The side isn't in the cut while it's being made because we only cut one piece at a time here. So we'll set that off. The pockets I've made now are all set. I always look them over to make sure that I've cut away all the material. There's just one little burr right there. I must have moved the router out. So I'm going to trim that and then I'll be ready to pull it out. Alright, so this piece is cut. Now I want to make the mating piece. I'm going to just use this to help me align it. I've got a stop here, but I also kind of eyeball my ends. I want them to be right on the money. So it's touching the underside of the stop. It's lined up flush here. I'll lock my clamping mechanism. Now I can remove this piece. And I'm going to replace it with a scrap of plywood. And this is what's going to be my backing board. So when I cut through this time with the other template, I won't tear up my workpiece. So I'll clamp that in position. I'll remove this template and position the other. Now there are 3 washers here on either side, and I had it all the way back. But for this thickness of side, I move up 1 washer. And this allows me to kind of fine-tune the jig. I have a little stock protruding out here, and that will be trimmed off slightly because the router will follow along there. Let's see what happens. Were my stock side a little thinner, I probably wouldn't cut along that front. That's a pretty nice fit right there. Looking from the inside, it'll butt down snugly. And I have to say, well, could I make that a little tighter? Yes, I could. And I'd bring the bit out of the router a little bit. In other words, it would extend further down from the base to tighten that up. But I wouldn't want it too much tighter because when you add glue, it's going to swell. You don't want it so tight, you have to force it together. The glue could set up before the joint bottomed out. Okay, well, this is an advanced setup on the Omni-Jig. We're going to move on to some other advanced setups. So I'll break this down. I'll see you back here shortly. We had just set up earlier with the Porter Cable Omni-Jig to make this hand-style, hand-cut dovetail. I've got another one that looks similar, except the rhythm's a little different. This is one of the differences with the Lee dovetailing jig. It also cuts the half-blind, but in this case what happens is we can adjust the width of these. In this template board, there are screws that allow us to move these pieces to set up various sizes of dovetails. So you can set up a rhythm that'll fit any width of drawer you have, and that's ideal. That's really nice. Now the other thing you'll notice is there's pieces of wood in here. This is so when that follower guide comes by, it doesn't dip in, causing the bit to dip in, but rather it rolls around there nicely. There are two sides to this. The one with the wooden blocks in it is for the drawer sides. The mating side is flipped over and it's slid on there, and you go against the angular ones for the drawer front. There's a positioning arrow on here as well, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I've set this up with a rhythm that's ideal for the drawers we're making for the cabinet back here, and I thought perhaps we'd deal with that first. So what I've done is I've made up my pieces, front left, side front left, front right, side front right, as we talked about earlier. And we'll set those up in the jig and talk about how it's going to work. Let's start with the drawer front. That's probably the best way to go. So we're going to take the front right, and we know we have to bring it around like this, orient it in the jig like so. Now we'll take the front right side and bring it around and orient it like so. We're going to just slip it in here and lightly clamp it so it becomes a stop. We'll make sure we're against the pin here, a little tight, so we'll back off on our cam clamps, check it, that's snug. We'll then bring this up so it's aligned, just to double check. Things look good. I'm on the stop here, I'm aligned correctly all the way along. So I'm happy with that. I can now remove this side. Next, I've got to bring the template down, and remember I said the angular sides were for the drawer front, so I've got it oriented correctly. I'll loosen these two clamps, bring it down so it's sitting level on top of the workpiece, and then I have to adjust this. There's a scale on here, and since my sides are 1/2 inch, I should go half, although I'm going to go a little strong, and the reason I'm going a little strong is I would sooner have them recessed, and I know when I work with this scale, it's off just a hair, at least to the way I'm doing. And my stock may be a little thicker than half, and that might be part of the problem. So I'm going to set a little strong, check and make sure my two sides agree. Now, I've got my stock clamped, I've got my template in place. The follower guide that we work with is almost identical to the one you've seen in almost every other setup, except now our router bit is extended further because our template is a little thicker. This can put a lot of stress on a 1/4 inch bit. So what we're going to do before we cut with this router bit and dovetail, we'll use that spiral bit that's in this plunge router, and we'll plunge through with it, and we'll remove some stock first. Now, this follower guide is just a little bit bigger than the other one, so that'll leave just a little bit of wood to be cleaned up with a dovetail bit. That'll reduce the strain, but it'll still allow a nice clean cut. I've got them all cleaned out. Now I'll follow around there again with the dovetail bit, which is a little bit larger. Okay, so that's the left side of the jig, so that's the front right corner. Let's do the front left now. I'll raise the board up. This comes around like so, comes over here. Again, we'll lightly lock that down. Bring this forward, butt it against there. Clamp that down. Double check our positioning. We're tight on there. We're looking good. Okay, we can bring this board down now. Our guide down. Lock that, both sides. Check to see if it's even on top of the piece. It is. We can then take our side out. Keep those oriented, keep the confusion to a minimum. All right, I'll do the same thing. I won't stop between. I'll cut it out, and I'll take the dovetailing bit and clean it up. I always check those to make sure they're cleaned up before I remove them. It's hard to get them back in exactly the same place on any dovetailing jig. All right, so we're on the right side of the jig. That's the front left corner. We'll take the front left upper portion, bring it back, reposition it. I got my two clamps down. Now I'll remove the front, and I raise the board up. What I'm going to do now is put a backing board, which is nothing but a piece of plywood in, and I'm going to have to tighten that up here, it looks like. Yeah, check that. What I've done is put this in. This is going to be a backing board, so as I cut through, it'll absorb any tear out. Now as I go across here, it's very easy to tear out on these outer corners, so we'll try to climb that. Now, we have the template on this side for the drawer front. To do the drawer sides, we flip it 180, put it back on. We have another scale on here that tells us exactly where we need to be. And again, I'm going just a little deep. Bring this down, level on my piece. And what I'm going to do is I'll start over here and kind of ease in and make a cut across there so I don't have much tear out. Got just a little bit of a whisker raised up there, but I'm real happy with that fit. Now I can go ahead and cut the other side, and that will be the front too. Now after I've cut the front too, I can then decide what I want to do. If I want to dovetail or dado the back, I can go ahead and handle that. This gives you an idea of a different type of spacing. The setups are the same to make a half-blind joint. I'm going to clear this away. We're going to glue up some stock and show you how, we're going to glue up some drawers, show you some techniques there, and then we'll talk a little bit about Consumer Reports. So I'll meet you back here at the bench. We've seen a number of dovetailing jigs in this video, and I thought I'd give you a little review and a little help in deciding what would be the best for you. I don't really act as a paid endorser, but I thought I'd share with you some of the things about these so you can make a decision on your own. As we look back here, we've got the Porter Cable basic dovetailing jig. This is a good simple jig, and it does the job. X being the cost, we can then move up to this one, which has one other feature, and that is the removable template. This would be about 1.1 to 1.2x in price. So you're paying a little more, but you've got a template that has a 1/4 inch and a 1/2 inch built in. If you want a 1/2 inch or a 1/4 inch template for this one, you have to buy it as an extra. Moving down, we have the Woodhaven, which has the 1/2 inch and 7/8 inch centers. So it's a little bit bigger in design, but it gives you a nice looking joint. It has the removable template, a very nice set of clamping mechanisms with handles that really are easy to work. This would be about 2x in price. This is a good general duty one, but it doesn't do the small. It does do the bigger ones, however. Moving down, we find we go up in price and in quality. This is a much larger jig. This will do a 24-inch piece. It also has a 16-inch model as well. One of the things you gain with this one is you can do everything from 1/4 inch dovetails up to the hand cut and sliding taper. Each time you buy a different template or set of templates to do that with. This jig would be about 4 to 5x in price. It has a clamping mechanism that will take the warp out of any board, which is one of the positive features of it. When you clamp this down, you're there for sure. So we can go from the small to the bigger. If we're working with 3/4 inch and 1/2 inch stock moving up, this jig will work very nicely. It will do through and half blind. Now we've only focused on half blind, but if you're doing box work, you may wish to make through dovetails. This one will also do through, so it has some advantages. This also has a very nice clamping mechanism. It's a cam orientation, and this bar here makes it a very firm clamp. The scales are easy to read, and with either one of these, you'll find as you get to the more advanced setups, you're going to have more time in the actual setup before you cut boards. Now, you might say, do I want to spend that much? Maybe you don't. You can go and start out with one of these or any of the ones on the back here. I can tell you this, the knowledge you gain there applies to these, and it's almost like learning to walk before you run. Whichever you decide to go with is fine with me. They'll all do the job. You've seen them work in here. What's your need? Decide on that, and that'll help you select the right one. Well, it's hard to believe that 90 minutes went by this fast. Believe me, in planning this video, I didn't think that would happen. Remember, if you want to be a better woodworker, do more woodworking. We'll see you in the next tape. Thanks for watching. Good to have a storage place for those expensive bits when they're not in use. In fact, that's kind of why we made up that nice base and the router table. If you've been admiring these during the course of the video, we'd like to tell you about a set of plans that are available for these. Many of my friends and students like this as well. They asked about the plans, and so we developed a set that are available now. There are 5 pages of prints here, and there's a lot of options that you can use no matter what type of router table you'd like to make up. And there's plenty of opportunities to try your router skills in making this up.